We continue with the third chapter of the book of Yeshayah, the book of Isaiah. Yesterday's chapter had this beautiful messianic vision of the future, highlighted by the idea of all of the nations, because God is the true judge, and therefore will be able to judge fully accurately without any bias or any incorrect actions, and therefore they will turn their swords into plowshares. And after that wonderful vision, unfortunately, there is a vision that changes a little bit here. So continuing chapter 3 again. Ki hine ha'adon Adonai tzvaot meisir miYerushalayim u'miYuda mish'ein u'mish'eina kol mish'an lechem v'chol mish'an mayim. So behold, God will remove from Jerusalem and from Yehuda every prop of food, every water. Dibor v'ish milchama shofet v'navi v'kosein v'zakein. And the soldier and the warrior and the judge and the prophet and the sort of the diviner and the elder, chsar chamishim unesu fanim, v'yoetz v'chacham charashim unevon lachash, the captains of the 50s and the advisors and the counselors and the skilled artisans and the expert enchanters, v'natati ne'arim sarehem v'ta'alulim yimshiluvam. And who's going to take the place of all these people in leadership in the army, in the government, in the banking system, in the legal system, in the prophetic system? The people who will take their places, we're told in verse 4, are going to be the young. The children will become their rulers, which is not always such a good thing. Right, that we saw this back in the book of Kings when Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, was challenged by the Israelites, by most of the northern tribes, to lessen the taxes, and he left behind the advice of the elders, who were the advisors to his father Shlomo, and listened to the advice of the youngsters who grew up with him, and their advice was terrible. And so sometimes having the youngsters be the ones who are giving the advice and in the leadership position is not such a good thing. Sometimes it is a good thing, because sometimes the youngsters see what's happening, see what's going to be the future, where unfortunately the elder citizens like ourselves are behind the times. But I don't think that's the way it's being used here. Continuing in verse 5. V'nigash ha'am ish be'ish v'ish berehu yirhavu hanar b'zakein v'hanichle b'nichbad. And the people will oppress one another, each oppressing his fellow. The young are going to bully the old, and the despised will bully those who are honored. Right? So the young are in charge, but it's becoming more of a situation of anarchy, not a situation of greatness. Ki pos ish be'achiv beit aviv simla lecha katzinti alanu. And what's going to happen? A man is going to come up to his brother, right, in whose father's house, where there is some clothing, meaning it's just a regular guy's house. And what's he going to say to him? He's going to say, "Come be our ruler." Right? Just one guy saying to somebody else, not somebody who necessarily has any of the qualities or qualifications to be a leader. And ruin will happen because of this. Right? You're going to have people who are leading you who are not experienced and not really able to do that. And that's in verse 7. And the other person who, right, I'm going to go to my brother and I'm going to say, lead us, and somebody else, right, and he's going to say, I'm not somebody who can do this. I can't fix wounds. I have no food. I have no clothing on my own. I can't be the chief. I don't have the qualifications. I don't have the food. The food is metaphorical. I don't have the clothing. I don't have the qualities and the experience. Because Jerusalem has stumbled and Judah has fallen, because by their word and deed they insulted God. They defied the majesty of God, right? We have here, it's just saying that the replacement of the rulers, the people who are in charge, things have gone in a downward spiral, and thus things are just continuing down that spiral. And part of the theme that we talked about these chapters, and we'll come back to it again, is the idea of a lack of leadership. The only one alone who can lead properly and faithfully and honestly is God. God is the only one who knows everything. Continuing in verse 9, he karet pneihem antabam dechatatam kistom higidu lo kichedu oy lenafsham ki gamlu lahem ra. Their partiality in judgment accuses them, right? As we just said, as opposed to God, there's no partiality. They're like the sins are like the sins of stone. They don't even hide their sins. So how terrible it is, how ill. Because who do they serve? They serve themselves, and that causes problems. Tigamlu lahem ra'ah. They cause themselves problems with the way that they sin. Imrut sadik kitov. Kifri ma'alalehem yochelu. So glory should go to the man who is at tzaddik. He will do well. He shall eat the fruit of his labors. Oy l'rasha ra, ki gmul yadav yeyaselo. But woe is to the wicked man, because of his ill, because of his sins, because of what he has done. Eventually, those sins will boomerang back to him. That will be done back to him. The tzaddik, the person who does righteously, he will eat the fruit of his labors. He will benefit in the long run. That's not necessarily why he's doing it, but that's the result that will eventually happen, as opposed to the wicked. The evil that he has done will boomerang back to him. Continuing in verse 12, Ami nogsav me'olel v'nashim mashluvo, Ami me'ashrecha mat'im v'derech orchotecha bileu. My people's rulers are the young. Right? Again, the young shouldn't be ruling. It should be people with experience. That's who should be ruling. And here we have something that at the time was seen, the next phrase was seen as a pejorative and a negative. That's not the way we see things in the world today, right? What's the next pejorative? Is that who is leading? Women are leading. And that is at that time problematic, when women were not in positions of leadership. And so that's seen as a lack of leadership amongst the men, amongst the experienced men who should be the leaders, that women are in charge, is showing a problem with that leadership. We talked actually a lot about that back in the book of Shoftim, where, again, this is not representative of our views today, but where in that book there were a lot of women leaders because the men were not being leaders. So we had, of course, most famously, we had Devorah. And in that chapter where Devorah says to Barak, go and lead the Jewish people, go and take them in war against Sisera. And he says, I'll only go if you go. And what does she say back to him? Okay, I'll go, but just know, glory will not come to you. The death of Sisera will come by a woman, and Yael is the one who kills Sisera, another woman, not even a Jewish woman who kills him. So here it's seen as a negative. It's showing a lack of leadership, and therefore who steps up to the plate. Again, very differently, I think, most of us at least think so today. Continuing that verse, God says, my people, your leaders are misleaders. They have confused the course of your path, right? It's supposed to be derech orchotecha. They're supposed to go in a certain way, but they are going in a different way. Continuing in verse 13, Pasuk Yud Gimel, Nitzav lariv Adonai va'omed ledin amin. However, God, he stands up to plead a cause. He rises to champion different people, right? As opposed to humanity who doesn't know how to do it right. Adonai b'mishpat yavo im ziknei amo v'sara. Va'atem bi'artem hakerem. What is going to happen? God brings his charge against the elders and the officers of his people, right? God is going to come to the officers and the elders who are not acting properly with this charge. And God is going to say to them, you have damaged the air, you have burned down, you have ravaged your vineyards, you have stolen, you've robbed from the poor in your houses, right? You stole from the poor. How do you think you have that beautiful thing in your home? Well, it's only because you have abused the poor, which we said in chapters past, back in the first chapter when Yeshayah said to the people, right, Lama li rov zivchechem, that God says to the people, I don't need your sacrifices. Your hands are full of blood. You took advantage of the people who have no help, of the widow, of the orphan, etc., etc. And that's the same thing that he's saying here as to how you've gained great wealth, which is demonstrating how instead of the leaders leading them down the right path, they have traverse down the wrong ways. Continuing in verse 15, Pasuk Tedvav, Malachem tidaku, ami ufnei aniyim tachnu, nu'um Adonai Elohim tzvaot. How dare you crush my people and grind the faces of the poor. That's what God, the Lord of hosts, says. And interesting, we see the word God here being described as, and often in these phrases, Tzivaot, the Lord of hosts. God, Tzava, of course, means an army. God is, in a sense, going to get, quote, whatever it means, his army together to take care of the offenses that you are doing. Vayomer Adonai, Yan ki gavu b'not Tzion v'teilachna netiot garon Misakrot einayim haloch v'tafof telachnu vraglayim te'achsana. Here again, this is a different viewpoint of women, but God says, because the daughters of Zion are so vain, and they walk with their heads thrown back, with their eyes looking and all around, and with their feet tinkling. I'm not even sure what that means. Vraglayim te'achsana. And now we're going to have a description of the most jewelry and adornments that we see in the entire Tanakh. V'sipach Adonai kadkod benot Zion v'Adonai patein yara. God will bare their pates. God will uncover their heads. Bayom ahu yisar Adonai tiferet ha'achasim v'ashvisim v'hasoharnim. And that day God will strip off the finery of their anklets, their anklet bracelets, the fillets and their crescents, v'anitafot v'hasheirot, the har alot, there's some sort of earrings and bracelets and veils, ha'pe'erim v'ha'tze'adot v'ha'kishurim uvatei ha'nefesh v'halechashim, the turbans, their armlets, the sashes, the talismans, the amulets, ha'tvaot v'nizmei ha'af, the signet rings and the nose rings, ha'michalatzot v'ha'ma'atafot v'ha'mitpachot v'ha'charitim, the festive robes, the mantles, the shawls, the purses, v'ha'gilyonim v'ha'stinim v'ha'tznifot v'ha'harididim, the lace gowns, the linen vests, the kerchiefs, the kafes, all those things that are being worn, which are demonstrating and showing the vanity of society. And in a sense, how is the vanity of society, how is that wealth happening? Only through the crushing of the poor. And this is saying about the women, and obviously we've said it's not only about the women, but in some of these books, it's easier to pick on the women back then than it was. And what is going to happen when God removes all of those sashes and bracelets and rings, etc., etc. In verse 24, pasuk Chav Dalet, vayatachat bosem makieh v'tachat chagura nikva v'tachat maaseh mikshe korcha v'tachat petigil machagoret sak ki tachat yofi. So instead of perfume, there will be rot, and instead of an apron, a rope. Although an apron here doesn't mean that the woman's in the kitchen cooking. Let's just be clear about that when it says an apron here. Instead of a diadem, a shorn head, right? No hair. Instead of a rich robe, sackcloth. A burn instead of beauty, right? All of the people who think that things are great for them in society, v'nafochu, not in the way that it was in Purim, when we went from the bottom to the top, but those who are taking advantage of others in society and their vanity is going to boomerang back against them. Mitayich b'cherev yipolu ugvuroteich b'milchama. Her men shall fall by the sword, her fighting manhood in battle. I don't think that means the women, but it means the men. Va'anu va'avlu pitacheha v'nikta la'aretz teshev. And her gates shall lament and mourn, and she shall be empty, shall sit on the ground. And here, even though here it's talking about women, I don't think it's really just about women. It's this idea sort of vanity, which unfortunately back then was described as being women, that women only care about, their bracelets and their gold rings and their chains and their fine clothing. And certainly we know that is not the case today. There are many men who only care about that. And certainly the great majority of women don't care just about that. But this is not about the content of character. This is about the lack of content of character. And even though we're only doing chapter 3, really these few verses really end in the next verse. I'll repeat it tomorrow, but let's look at the first verse of chapter 4 and what's going to happen. What's going to happen to these women who were formerly the wealthiest? They had everything, and now they're sitting with nothing, poverty stricken. 7 women will take hold of one man, saying, we'll eat our own food and we'll wear our own clothes. Only let us be called by your name. Take away our disgrace. The way we lived our life in the past is now disgraceful. We just want, in a sense, to start over. We want to begin in a new way. And you can understand that as being literal. You can understand this as almost being sort of figurative. The word sheva, a shvuah, an oath, a restart for these women. You could say a restart for this society. Maybe it really means that all of Bnei Yisrael, in a sense, will come back to God, back for another covenant, back for another shvuah, and say to God, we need to be back. We need to have your name. We need to be Am Yisrael again. We can't be this nation of vanity, this nation that only cares about the way we look and the way we are perceived, and not the way we are actually acting. And we'll conclude with this. So it's not clear all the time here in the prophecies of Yeshayah when he is offering these prophecies, because as we said, he was a prophet, a Navi, for probably over 6 decades. But it appears that when he's offering this prophecy, it's at one of the moments, maybe it's the time of Azaryahu, when Bnei Israel generally were very, very successful financially. There are different times during a 6-decade reign, right? We know this today in America. 2 years ago, the economy was amazing. Today, the economy is terrible. Tomorrow, who knows what it's going to be? So, right, this seems to be a time where the economy seems to be doing great. But as he will say, and as other prophets will say in the future, when the economy is great, don't go and buy a 13th Mercedes. Don't go and buy another gold necklace. This is a time and a moment where we have to consider those who are lost, people who are not gaining the riches from society. And that is the way that Bnei Israel are supposed to act. And that is something that hasn't been done. And their vanity, unfortunately, will turn. And hopefully after the suffering, they will turn back to God and back to the moral and ethics that are supposed to be done in order to build a just society in Israel.